he met her because of a coffee stain. It wasn't the kind of moment that artists paint or poets immortalize. It was clumsy, mundane, born in the in-between time of one morning lecture ending and another never worth attending. Dylan had been distracted, scanning his phone, sleep-deprived and low on caffeine, when his elbow sent his half-full paper cup tumbling across the edge of the cafe table, dark brown bleeding into the soft beige of her vintage silk blouse. For a split second, the clatter of the cup seemed to echo louder than it should have, like some cosmic record scratch, halting the murmur of Columbia's uptown academic bubble. She didn't scream. She didn't flinch. She looked down at the spreading stain, then up at him with the kind of deliberate stillness that only comes from a life that had long since stopped expecting apologies to matter. "I am so sorry," Dylan had stammered, snatching a napkin, then 3, then 8, practically attacking her chest with crumpled paper like he could undo time. I wasn't looking, She had taken the napkin from his hand, methodical, calm, her voice like winter sun through a cracked window. "It's silk. There's no saving it." Her eyes were sharp beneath long lashes, gray like a storm threatening to become something worse. Her features were strong, carved. There were fine lines at her eyes, not from laughter but squinting into disappointment. The kind of woman you don't expect to be sitting alone in a college cafe, unless she's waiting for a son or grading papers. She wasn't wearing a faculty badge. No laptop. No ring. "I'll pay for it," Dylan had offered, standing dumb and guilty while she dabbed at herself. "It's the least I can do." "That blouse was older than you," she said, and there was the faintest pull of something between a sigh and a chuckle in her throat. "No offense. But there's nothing left to pay for." He wasn't supposed to keep staring. He wasn't supposed to notice how the light caught the fading pink in her hair, a deliberate streak almost hidden beneath dark brown, or the way she wore that quiet fatigue-like perfume. She reminded him of his mother, but not really. His mother didn't smirk like that. Didn't smell like patchouli and books. Didn't cross her legs in jeans torn at the knees that looked genuinely worn, not designer distressed. Still, he said something. He had to. "Then let me buy you a coffee to replace the one you just wore. And maybe hear the story of that blouse." It was reckless, reflexive. He wasn't flirting, not exactly. But there was a pull, sudden and absurd, like she was a page in a book he had to reread 3 times to understand. She hesitated, not in confusion, but in calculation. Then she looked at the empty chair across from her like it might bite. "I'm only staying if you promise not to tell me your major." "Deal," he grinned, and she tilted her head. "I'm Lydia." "Dylan." He ordered her a flat white, the least offensive drink he could guess, and returned to find her already reading again, some hardcover novel with yellowed pages and no dust jacket. She didn't ask questions. He didn't push. They sipped in silence, and it wasn't awkward. It was something else, something heavier and oddly safe. She told him about the blouse eventually, not that day, but on a Thursday 2 weeks later after their third accidental meeting at the same cafe. She'd bought it in Florence when she was 26, had worn it to 3 failed interviews, and once while dancing barefoot in a stranger's kitchen the night before her wedding was called off. She laughed when she said it, but her laugh was like glass, pretty, but sharp if you lean too close. Dylan started to crave the quiet parts of their conversations. The way she talked like time was slow, deliberate. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She didn't need to. She had opinions like mountains, unmoving and unapologetic, and when she looked at him, it wasn't like a peer or a professor, it was like someone reading an old diary aloud, 1 page at a time, surprised to find something familiar in the ink. One afternoon, while the trees in Morningside Park whispered hints of fall, she asked if he believed people could be full of cracks and still be worth something. He'd said yes without thinking. "I don't mean charming flaws," she said, eyes narrowed. "I mean, mistakes. Ugly ones. The kind you keep on a leash." "I still mean yes." And that was the first time he saw it. The corner of her mouth curled, her eyes softened, and something inside her chest moved, like an animal she thought had died long ago stirred with a sigh. It wasn't just a smile. It was a wound breathing again. The kind of expression people don't wear unless they're too tired to pretend anymore. And in that exact moment, Dylan realized he was in danger. Not because she was older. Not because she might be broken. but because she was real. Imperfect. Alive. And he wanted more. The first real crack came in the form of an Instagram post. Not from Dylan or Lydia, neither was the type to overshare, and Lydia didn't even use social media, which she referred to as digital narcissism in square frames. It came from someone else entirely, Chloe, a sophomore Dylan had shared a philosophy of literature class with last semester, the kind of girl who thought camellias were a personality and referred to poetry as sacred chaos. She'd posted a picture from the corner table at the cafe, a lazy snap of her oat milk latte with the caption, older woman, younger guy, serious Mrs. Robinson energy next to me RNI's hashtag Columbia Chronicles hashtag Get It Girl. At first, it was funny. Dylan laughed when he saw it because it was ridiculous, anonymous and throwaway. But that post got reshared, screenshotted, discussed on a Reddit thread for campus gossip, and by the next day someone had guessed his name. I didn't know 20-year-olds were into existential crises in arthouse films, one comment read. Another, he's probably just in it for the experience. She's going through her second divorce, calling it now. He hadn't realized how fast rumor metastasized on campus. The Columbia gossip sphere was a paradox, always tired, but never asleep. By Tuesday, someone had called him MILF Hunter during a lecture. His friend Gabe slapped his shoulder and winked. Tell me you're not actually banging that woman with the streak in her hair. You know who I mean. She looks like she reads Virginia Woolf for fun. And for a few seconds, Dylan almost denied it. Almost nodded and said, nah, bro, just a weird coincidence, let it slide back into anonymity. But something held in his chest like a rising tide. The conversations he'd had with Lydia about memory, about failure, about the way people turn trauma into religion, those weren't accidents. They were the most honest moments of his life. And suddenly, the people he shared lunch with felt noisy. Small. So he didn't deny it. He didn't confirm it either. He just looked away. Lydia, for her part, found out the same day, but not from him. She heard it from Margot, a woman in her co-op building who she occasionally gardened with, someone who'd once called her deliciously intimidating. Margot had said it like a joke, laughing as she trimmed a lavender bush. So, is the cafe boy your secret boy toy? Columbia's buzzing like it's spring mating season. Lydia had smiled. Smiled that sharp, practiced smile she wore like armor. But she didn't laugh. She went home and stared at her reflection for 15 minutes. Her face looked familiar and foreign. She hadn't cried in 6 years. She didn't cry now either. When Dylan knocked on her apartment door that evening, something he'd only done twice before, she answered in silence. The kind that choked and didn't blink. He stepped in, slow. You heard. She didn't ask from who. She didn't ask how. She didn't ask why he didn't tell her. She asked, do you still want this? He didn't answer right away, and that made her flinch. I do, he finally said, and it sounded like he'd had to dig that word out from a cave. But I don't know how to protect it. And you? She poured 2 glasses of wine, handed him one, and said, we're not a fairy tale. This doesn't end with applause. The best we can do is not implode. I don't care what they say. You should. Because you live in their world. That night they didn't touch each other. They sat close but didn't lean in. They drank like old friends at the edge of a funeral, holding the space between them sacred and suspicious. A week later, things were half normal, which is to say they were pretending well enough to survive it. Then came the letter. It was handwritten, folded once, no return address, delivered not to her but to his dorm mailbox. No envelope, just his name, Dylan. Inside, it read. She's using you. She's done this before. She leaves messes behind and moves on. Ask around. You'll find the truth. There was no signature. No context. But the penmanship was elegant, old-fashioned, like someone who'd spent their life writing for permanence. Dylan showed her the letter. Lydia read it without blinking, once, then again. Then she walked to her bookshelf, pulled out a faded journal, and dropped it onto the table. If you want to know what I've done, she said, her voice like wind over gravel, "this is everything." He didn't touch it. "I don't want the past in a book. I want the present in your eyes." But he read it later, in secret. Of course he did. Inside were pages about a woman who once married a man to escape her father, who cheated on that man after 3 years of being ignored, who had an affair with a colleague 10 years older than her, and who once left a promising manuscript on a train because she was too drunk to remember her own stop. Lydia's life wasn't chaotic, it was simply lived without apology, full of scars she refused to airbrush. And Dylan, 21, still swimming through the shallow end of consequences, felt like he'd been pulled into the undertow of a story so much bigger than him. They met in private now. Her apartment. His car. Hidden corners of Fort Tryon Park. He knew people were still whispering, still wondering. But he also knew that every time she looked at him, really looked at him, she saw something that made her want to keep breathing. And for the first time, he realized he saw that in her, too. But the cost of being seen like that? Of being known? Was that it made you vulnerable to exposure? Climax of Act 2, the phone call came at 2:12 a.m. Dylan answered groggy and confused. On the other end, a voice he recognized, Professor Melrose, his advisor. "Dylan," she said carefully, "I don't know what's going on, but you need to be careful. People are watching. There's talk. Don't let this ruin your future." Click. Just a click. But it sounded like a door slamming in a dream. It was always around midnight when they spoke like that, raw, unfiltered, without any performance or pretense. It didn't start intentionally. Sometimes it was after a bad day, other times it was after a long silence. But somewhere in that slow orbit of wanting and not knowing how to say it, midnight became their hour. By day, Dylan still walked the campus with a second skin. Everyone who talked to him seemed to be talking through something, like they were trying to piece together who he was now that they thought they knew what he was doing. The worst part wasn't the snide comments or the confused half-smiles from people who used to feel like friends, it was the pretending. Pretending not to know that the only reason Professor Melrose stopped inviting him to independent research projects was because someone had whispered his name in the same sentence as inappropriate involvement. Lydia, meanwhile, was turning into something ghostly. Not fragile, ghosts aren't fragile. They haunt. She became even quieter, even more precise in how she showed up in the world. No more stopping by the cafe. No more accidental brushes of the hand in public. She'd started slipping through the city like a rumor. But in the hours between 12 and 3, they could still be who they were before the world had an opinion. They'd talk on her balcony sometimes, curled in mismatched blankets, a bottle of red wine between them, the skyline humming like a distant pulse. Lydia once told him she didn't believe in soulmates but did believe in timing. That everyone we meet is either a door, a mirror, or a lesson. She said it like scripture. "Which one am I?" he'd asked, voice hoarse, eyes unfocused. She had hesitated, fingers tightening around the stem of her glass. "You're none of those. You're a storm I thought had passed." And just like that, Dylan had leaned in and kissed her, not like someone desperate or young, but like someone who had finally stopped lying to himself. Their kisses had weight, like the world was tipping, like they were sliding down a hill with no brakes and no regrets. Those were the nights he touched her face and didn't feel like a boy fumbling in the dark. She'd let her head rest against his chest, and he would feel it, her stillness. How she calmed when she trusted. And in those silences, they created their own language. No declarations, no definitions. Just breath and body and warmth. But the city doesn't let secrets stay quiet forever. It happened after one of those nights, one where they hadn't left her apartment until almost dawn. Dylan had taken the side alley, slipping his hoodie over his head, trying to look like someone on a very early jog. He didn't notice the man across the street until it was too late, someone older, thin, with a face that rang a bell he couldn't place. The man had paused, narrowed his eyes, and said nothing. Just watched. 3 days later, Lydia got an email from her old literary agent. Subject: Strange Encounter. A man named Darrell Rosen stopped by my office this morning. Said he used to work with you at the foundation. He mentioned he saw you last week with a student. Asked if I knew anything about repeating patterns. Lydia, should I be worried? I didn't say anything, of course. But, be careful. That name, Darryl Rosen, Lydia hadn't heard it in nearly a decade. He had once been her boss, briefly a friend, and then a very public mistake. He had tried to mentor her when she was younger, helped her get her first grant, then turned cold when she refused him. The story was messy, hushed, professional poison. Now he was back, not for revenge, no, that would be too direct, but for leverage. He had always liked having the last word. She didn't tell Dylan immediately. She told herself it was to protect him, but the truth was harder than that. She was afraid. Not of Darryl, or of the gossip, but of what Dylan might feel if he realized just how many pieces of her past were still walking around in suits and shaking hands. Still, he found out. They were in her apartment, eating leftover Thai, when her phone buzzed on the counter and Dylan, without thinking, glanced at the screen. Darryl Rosen, how many young men do you need to feel alive again? He didn't say anything right away. He just put down his fork. Stared at her. And Lydia, like a candle flickering in its final hour, just nodded. I'm sorry you saw that. Is it true? Her eyes didn't blink. Does it change how you see me? No, he said, quietly. But it makes me wonder if I ever knew how to. They didn't speak for hours after that. That night, for the first time in weeks, Dylan didn't stay. He walked the 30 blocks back to campus in the dark, his thoughts louder than traffic. The city was thick with July heat, and everything felt too much, too fast, too complicated, too real. Still, she texted him at 12:01 a.m. I miss the version of me I am when I'm with you. And that scares me. He replied at 12:16. Then let's just be scared together. And when they met again 2 days later, on a fire escape in Harlem, whiskey between them and the moon overhead, neither of them apologized. They just existed. Like smoke rising from an old building. Like people who didn't know how to stop needing each other even when the walls were closing in. Climax of Act 3. It was a rooftop party. Gabe's 22nd birthday. Dylan didn't want to go, but he did. He needed normalcy, or something resembling it. Music blared, drinks flowed, and the skyline stretched like a promise. Lydia wasn't supposed to be anywhere near it. But she came anyway. She didn't announce herself. She came to talk, to explain, to stop hiding. And that's when Elise, Gabe's ex, a journalism student with a memory for drama and a phone always at the ready, snapped a picture. Lydia standing too close. Dylan looking too soft. Something undeniable about the way their shadows merged. The flash was unintentional. But the implications weren't. By the time Dylan noticed, Elise was already posting. Looks like campus gossip wasn't so off after all. #Cougar confirmed. The caption wasn't what mattered. The picture was. Proof. And now, someone had seen them. Not just someone. A dozen someones. The secret was no longer a secret. It was a spectacle. They didn't speak for 5 days. Not out of anger, anger is still connection, but out of the hollowed out silence of two people who know their world is collapsing and are too exhausted to pick up the phone. Dylan went to class like a ghost in someone else's skin. He saw the picture everyone had. It had migrated beyond campus gossip into the quieter corridors of professional reputation. His classmates stared longer. Professors called on him less. His inbox filled with non-committal messages from his internship prospects. We're currently re-evaluating our summer program placement. Thank you for your patience. And Lydia endured something worse. She was scheduled to speak at a literary conference in Hudson Valley, a keynote panel on memory and modernity in American essays. It was supposed to be a reintroduction to the literary world, a second debut after years of hiding behind editorial jobs and unfinished manuscripts. She hadn't published anything in over 4 years. This was her chance to step back into the light. Dylan didn't plan on going. He wasn't invited. But that morning, something in his chest pulled like gravity. He needed to see her. Not just because he missed her, or because he was scared. But because the story of them deserved a real chapter ending, not a fade to black. He arrived late. She was already on stage, seated at the edge of a long table flanked by authors decades older than him. The panel moderator, some sleek, silver-haired critic named Victor Hall, was in mid-question, his tone laced with that perfect academic snidness that always sounded civil but meant war. "So, Lydia," Victor asked, flipping through a folder that clearly held a printed copy of the now infamous photo, "as someone who has long written about the boundaries between intimacy and narrative, how do you reconcile your personal decisions with your public persona?" It wasn't a question. It was a dagger. The crowd murmured. Lydia didn't flinch. She crossed her legs, adjusted the microphone, and paused just long enough to make everyone lean forward. "I used to believe," she said slowly, "that the most dangerous thing a woman could be was visible. That if you aged, you were mocked. If you stayed silent, you were erased. And if you dared to want something after 40, love, sex, relevance, you were called desperate." Someone in the back laughed. It sounded like a cough, but it wasn't. She didn't react. "I've made mistakes. Many. I've chased the wrong people and left the right ones waiting. I've clung to guilt like it was a second skin. But one thing I won't apologize for." She looked up then, right into the audience, scanning until she found him, standing awkwardly against the far wall, out of place in his too big jacket, is feeling alive again. The entire room shifted. You could feel it, the unease, the recalculation, the spark of discomfort that happens when people realize they're watching something real. "I am 43 years old. The person you saw me with in that photo? He didn't seduce me. I wasn't broken and waiting to be fixed. I loved him. I love him. And if that makes you uncomfortable, good. You should ask yourself why." The silence after that wasn't awkward. It was holy. And then, the moderator tried to recover. He made some weak comment about professionalism and perception, something about boundaries. But no one was listening anymore. Because Lydia had done the one thing no one expected, she had told the truth. Not the clean version. Not the filtered, age-appropriate one. The real truth. Later, as the crowd dispersed and people began whispering in more flattering tones, brave, bold, Rod Dillon stood outside by the fountain, unsure whether to run or wait. She came to him. No makeup now. Hair pinned lazily back. Eyes soft but serious. "You didn't have to come," she said. "I know," he replied. "But I wanted to see you say it." "Say what?" "That you love me." She let out a breath like she'd been holding it all day. "I didn't say it for you. I said it for me. That makes it better." They didn't kiss. Not then. Too many cameras. Too much aftermath. But they held hands, fingers twisted like vines, and for a moment, they let the world watch without hiding. That night, social media exploded again, this time with polarized hashtags. Hashtag Lydia Lives Again trended. So did hashtag Ethics Matter. Think pieces surfaced, is age just a number? Academic power and gendered assumptions. Love in the time of outrage. But none of it mattered as much as what came from people close to them. Gabe texted Dylan. "You could have told me, man. I would have backed you. She's kind of a badass." His mother called and said nothing for 10 seconds. Then, "Is this why you stopped coming home?" And finally, Professor Melrose again, this time in person. She asked Dylan to meet in her office. No threats. Just a file folder and a warning. "Your application for the Fall Research Fellowship is on the line. They're watching now. Carefully." He stared at her. "So I have to choose?" She didn't say yes. But she didn't say no. Outside her office, Lydia was waiting for him. She'd heard. She'd always been good at finding the cracks in silence. The final time they met, it wasn't dramatic. No candles. No storm. Just a small bench near the Hudson, the city a slow-breathing thing behind them. It was early September now, and summer had started loosening its grip. The leaves were whispering again, that faint rustle of change, and somewhere in the distance, a violin was playing badly from an open apartment window. They sat in silence for a long time, each waiting for the other to speak. But Lydia, as always, was the one who broke it first, not because she wanted to, but because she understood the burden of waiting. "I think we reached the edge of the story," she said, looking at her hands instead of him. "This is the part where one of us has to say goodbye." "Do we?" Dylan asked, not as a plea, but a quiet observation. "Why does it have to end like this?" She turned to him then, really turned. Her expression was worn, beautiful in its complexity, like the final brushstroke on a masterpiece no one asked for. "Because love," she said, "doesn't always mean holding on. Sometimes it means knowing when to let the other person grow without you." He stared out at the river. "You think I need to grow away from you?" "I think you need space to become something you haven't yet imagined," she said. "And I think I would anchor you too soon. And you would make me feel young again in all the wrong ways." "That sounds poetic and noble and completely wrong," he said, smiling even though his chest ached. "But okay." He didn't argue. He didn't beg. There was something sacred about not fighting this. "I'm not ashamed of us," he said. "Even if no one else understood it. Even if the whole damn world thought we were a mistake." "You were never a mistake," she said, firm. "You were the most human thing I've felt in years." A pause. Then he asked the question he'd been holding since the night on her fire escape. "Since the letter. Since the photo. Since the speech. Was it real for you?" Her answer came like breath. "Every moment." He nodded. Bit the inside of his cheek. Swallowed something that would never quite stop burning. Then he did what he'd always known he would, he stood. She didn't ask him to stay. He didn't ask her to come. They hugged like a slow exhale, no lingering hands, no parting kiss. Just a kind of weightless grief that only comes from having loved someone enough to know when not to hold on. He turned to go. She watched until he disappeared. A week later, Dylan received an email. Subject: Your fellowship status. Dear Mr. Langston, we're pleased to inform you that your application has been reconsidered and accepted into the fall research program. We trust this will be a time of significant growth. The board. He read it twice. Then deleted it. Then pulled it back from trash and forwarded it to his mother. That night, he opened a new document on his laptop. The title page read: The Shape of What We Don't Say, Essays on Desire, Silence, and Age. He didn't write her name anywhere. But she lived in every paragraph. Somewhere across the city, Lydia was writing too. A return to form. Her first essay in 5 years. It opened with this line: When you are loved by someone much younger, you do not feel young. You feel seen. She didn't send it to anyone. Not yet. She saved it to a flash drive. Put the flash drive in a drawer next to a photo of a man who once asked her about a coffee stain. And then she did something she hadn't done in a decade. She bought a one-way ticket to Lisbon. Not to disappear. To begin. Last climax. 3 months later, Dylan gave a lecture, his first public one, as part of his fellowship. The topic was generational narrative and emotional authenticity. There were 20 people in the room. Students, professors, strangers. He didn't look for her in the crowd. But at the very end, a woman stood up and asked a question. Her hair was long, dark, streaked with fading gray. Her voice was low and firm. Do you believe stories like the ones you describe can survive? Dylan didn't blink. He knew a ghost when it walked. I don't think survival is the point, he said. I think some stories exist to remind us we were here. That we felt something we weren't supposed to, and we did it anyway. The woman nodded. She left before he finished.